Hey everyone, today is November 4th, 2020, and of course, you guys will be watching this later, so by the time you watch it, you will probably already know who the next president of the United States is going to be. But as of right now, I have no idea, right? The race is very close right now. There's been some complications with the voting system, so we weren't able to know on November 3rd, but now today is November 4th. But hopefully we'll know later this evening or something like that. But hopefully by the time you guys watch this video, you will already have known who the next president will be. I thought today was a very unique day because there's a lot of anxiety and stress going on in America right now, not knowing who's going to be the next president. And I thought, how should Christians respond no matter which candidate becomes the next president? So if we look at the different presidents, we would say that they're just polar opposites. I would say that there can be some complementary relationship between liberal and conservative ideologies, but these two candidates, they're so far on the opposite sides, chances are you either love one and hate the other, right? I mean, they're just so opposite, it's just crazy. And as a result, there's a lot of division in America because of it. And that's something else we should probably talk about as well, the division in America. But what if the candidate that you love doesn't win? And maybe the candidate that you hate, or not necessarily that you hate, but maybe you hate their values or their ideologies and their policies and stuff like that. Maybe you hate those things. What happens if they win? Well, first we need to remember, according to the Bible, God is the one who raises up authorities, right? He raises them up to do His good work, whether it's to judge people for their wickedness, to judge the wicked and punish them, or to reward the just, things like that. God has raised these people up for a reason. We might look at this candidate and say, how can God use this person? This person is so flawed. This person is so against God. God always uses flawed people, except for Jesus, of course. Look at the entire Bible and all throughout history. God has always used, again, besides Jesus, has always used flawed people. I mean, the Bible makes it very clear, everyone has sinned. Everyone is flawed. No one is worthy of God's glory, but yet God continues to use flawed people. We can think of an example of King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, if you look at him, he was a pagan king. He followed false gods. He had an ego issue up to the moon, right? This guy was just crazy against God, someone who would think would be completely out of God's favor, but yet God took Nebuchadnezzar and He gave him authority over Israel. He gave him authority over Judah, God's chosen people, and He put them in authority first to punish them, right? Because they had done a lot of bad things, and He did punish them for their wickedness. But then we would look at it and say, why is God using this pagan king? Why is God using someone who doesn't even believe in the God of Israel? But God used Nebuchadnezzar not only to punish the Israelites for their sins, and of course, eventually they were allowed to go back to Israel and Judah, but also He used him to glorify His name. We could look at several occasions in which Nebuchadnezzar was used to glorify God's name throughout his entire empire. And we could think, how could God do that? God always uses flawed human beings. So no matter which candidate wins, God is still in authority, God is still in control, and God can still use that candidate for His glory. Now that leads me to my next point. Should we obey this authority? Should we accept this authority? Again, if God raised them up, we have an obligation to follow them, right? The Bible tells us to obey those in authority over us. But of course, if they ask us to do something that contradicts what God says, such as when Nebuchadnezzar told Daniel's 3 friends that to worship an idol and to bow down to it, and they said, no, we have to worship God before we worship man. And that's true of this situation as well. If the president or the governor or the senators or the House of Representatives, whatever it is, if any of them are telling us to do something, anyone in authority over us is telling us to do something that contradicts what God has said, we have an obligation to do what God has said rather than what man has said. But other than that, God has put them in authority for a reason, and as such, we have an obligation to follow those who God put in authority over us. So we can't go around as Christians saying, #NotMyPresident. We have to remember God has put them in authority over us for a reason. We may not like it. We may even hate it. We may even hate the person. I don't think we should hate people as Christians, but you may even very strongly dislike the person. You may hate everything that they stand for, but the truth is God put them in authority for a reason. We may not know what that reason is, but the truth is God put them there for a reason. And as such, we shouldn't be going around #NotMyPresident concept, things like that. So then, of course, we also need to be praying for our president. Again, God can use our president. Let's be praying for whoever the next president is. Let's be praying that God uses them in big ways, ways that he used Nebuchadnezzar, ways that he used Darius. Both Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, and even Cyrus to some extent, they declared God's name throughout their empires. God used these men, these kings, for a good reason, even though we look at them and say, why would God use such types of kings? But God did use such types of kings. So we can look at that and we can know that God can use them, and we should be praying for them, praying that they will humble themselves, praying that they will do God's will, not their own will.